why there is so much bad information floating around about Celeste Rivas, the young woman whose body was found in a Tesla that belonged to the pop singer David, and why the lawsuits filed over the Palisades fire may be taking a significant turn that could lead to some new revelations about how that fire really started. It's the Leonard Files Podcast. I'm investigative reporter Eric Leonard from NBC Los Angeles. We're recording this on Friday, December 5th, so all the news sort of reflects where things stand today. If you're watching this later, maybe check to see if we have some updated reporting, because both of the stories we're going to talk about today have been changing what feels like every few days. There's always been new stuff to cover and new things to report. They don't always make it into news stories on TV over on Channel 4 because we try to wait until there's something really significant rather than bombard viewers with every little incremental update. But it seems like there's new stuff all the time about both of these. So first, I thought I would start with the Celeste Rivas case and why it seems like there has been so much bad information floating around, particularly in the last 2 weeks. But prior to that, there were all kinds of rumors going around, people floating various theories online that we sometimes had to look into and then debunk, and then other times completely ignored because they were outrageous. And there's also been a number of people that we have had contact with who seem like they're trying to inject themselves into certainly our news coverage, but maybe the story in general. And so far, none of them have had what we believe to be any kind of legitimate information about it. So that's part of what's sort of circulating around. Plus, there's been so much attention on this that any new development gets a lot of attention. And we've found ourselves in our newsroom spending a lot of time sort of batting down rumors and things that turn out not to be true. And part of what's contributing to all of this is that there is an unresolved mystery as to how this young woman died. Celeste Rivas, whose remains were found in the front trunk of that Tesla that was parked in the Hollywood Hills back in September, we now know, based on some of our own reporting in the last couple of weeks, may have died a much longer ago than we initially thought. We reported shortly after the remains were discovered that the car had been parked in that neighborhood for weeks, maybe a month, maybe even longer, and at least a week between the time the LA Department of Transportation parking enforcement had gone out and issued the first of several citations to the car. Then another week elapses, or more than a week, before the car was impounded. But prior to that, neighbors who live on this street up in the Hollywood Hills where the car was found said that it had been parked there for weeks and weeks and weeks, including one delivery driver who said he was going back and forth in the neighborhood for a long time and had noticed the car, he thought, since July. So July to August, the car is impounded the first week of September. That's when the body was found. Well, we reported a couple of weeks ago that there was some new information that the sense on the part of the detectives was that she had died last spring. And the reason that's significant is because the LA County Department of Medical Examiner, the coroner, has not released a cause of death or an estimated time of death in the case, and they've been looking at this for a couple of months now. And so that unanswered question, upon which a huge amount of this case is going to hinge on, is part of what's fueling all of the speculation about what is possibly going on and why could it be taking this long. Adding to that, of course, is that the LA County Coroner's Office was asked to seal the case by the LAPD detectives who were investigating it. And the Coroner's Office, the medical examiner, which is an independent law enforcement agency, they're not part of the police, initially refused. The coroner said, there's a lot of public interest in this case. The death of a human being that is a coroner case is presumptively public. You don't want a government where people can die and then, especially under mysterious circumstances, and then no one ever gets to know what happened or who was responsible or when it happened. And so the general standing of the law is that if somebody becomes a coroner case because of the circumstances of their death, that information is distinctly and very importantly public. And so there's a bar that has to be crossed before the coroner is going to withhold that information from the public. And in the past, and I say this as having spent some decades covering crime and law enforcement in the courts and trials, the coroner's office generally did whatever the law enforcement agency asked. If they wanted a case closed off, they call it putting it on a security hold, then the coroner just did it. If the police wanted something adjusted in an autopsy report, oftentimes that was done too. And the coroner said, well, the entire circumstances of somebody's death, especially criminal ones, might be considered in making a medical determination about how somebody died. Sometimes there just isn't enough information medically to make or from the investigation of the body itself to make a determination. So they'll use information from law enforcement, and sometimes the coroner's doctor, the pathologist, will reach a conclusion that the police don't like. And so the practice has been, whether right or wrong, the practice has always been that many times the coroner's office would defer to the law enforcement agency that was involved in a particular case. But recently, the coroner's office has been doing less of that. And in the Celeste Rivas case in particular, the LAPD went to the coroner's office and said, please remove all public information about this case from public viewing. And the coroner's office, the medical examiner, said no. So a couple of weeks ago, we learned that the LAPD went back to the court. I shouldn't say back, went to a judge with the assistance of the LA County District Attorney's Office and asked for the details to be removed from public view. So this we published back on November 25th. The LA County Medical Examiner removed that information about the Celeste Rivas-Hernandez case, and they said they received a court order to put this on security hold. And the medical examiner said in a statement, no records or details, including the cause and manner of death, can be released or posted until further notice. On November 21st, there was a court order obtained at the request of the LAPD. The LA Times got the affidavit that was sworn out by an LAPD detective. This is somebody from the LAPD robbery homicide unit that's investigating the case. I'll play a little bit of what we had on television that day.
At 6 with some new details surrounding the death of Celeste Rivas. A judge has ordered certain information about this case to be sealed. Good evening once again, everyone. I'm Colleen Williams.
And I'm Annabelle Sedano in for Michael Brownlee. This latest move comes while detectives continue to investigate how the teenager's body ended up in the front trunk of a Tesla owned by the pop singer David.
Our investigative reporter Eric Leonard's been following the story from the beginning. He joins us live from the newsroom with this update. Eric.
Right. This has to do with the examination of her remains and any new information that comes from testing and lab work at the LA County Coroner's Office. Keep in mind that office is independent of the police and until last week had kept some details of this case out in public in a database that anyone could search. So you get the gist of all of that, which is that the LAPD asks a judge to issue an order. It's essentially a sealing order for the coroner's case, so the public doesn't get to find out what's going on with the investigation until the LAPD does and has an opportunity to act on it. And at some point in the future, it will become public. And the big mystery here, how did she die and when did she die? What were the mechanisms of that death? And part of what's playing into the LAPD's decision to go to a judge and ask to have the information revealed could also be our reporting from a similar time, which is that we learned from some of our contacts at LAPD that they believe that Celeste Rivas died back in the spring, and they believe that the singer who owned the Tesla should now be considered a suspect in her death. Do keep in mind, by the way, that the death is still considered an unexplained death, a mystery. It has not been categorized as a crime of death like manslaughter or homicide or murder, anything like that. Here, I'll play a little bit of our reporting back from the 18th.
About the death of Celeste Rivas. She's the 15-year-old girl whose body was found in the front trunk of a Tesla that belongs to the pop singer David.
Yeah, police say they now consider the singer a suspect in her death and say they have better information about when she may have died. Our investigative reporter Eric Leonard joins us live from the newsroom with an update for us. Eric?
Hi, Michael and Colleen. Well, as we've been reporting, LAPD detectives from the Robbery Homicide Division have been working this case intensely ever since NBC4 broke the story that a body had been found by workers in a tow yard back in September. Well, now those detectives, we're told, are closer than ever to understanding what happened to this girl and when it happened and who may be responsible. A senior law enforcement source with direct knowledge of this case tells NBC4 Investigates they now believe 15-year-old Celeste Rivas died sometime in the spring. That happened. Okay, so I think that, by the way, was the most significant piece of new information that we reported, which was not that the singer was considered a suspect. I think that was clear from the beginning. It's his car. It's unexplained. He did not cooperate with law enforcement, and so we probably could have said something similar to that a couple of months ago. But now they're kind of making it public, even though the LAPD did not come out and release a statement. We're saying, well, this person is a suspect. We got it from some of our contacts in the police department, but it was very clear that it was a shift in the approach from the LAPD's public relations relating to this case. So, number one, he's a suspect. Less news. More news at that time, which was on the 15th of November or so, was that they believe that Celeste Rivas died in the spring. Now, that's interesting also because we know the LA County coroner, which didn't seal its public case until a week after this, still had not determined the timing or the cause of Rivas's death at the time that the LAPD says it became confident she died in the spring, which, if you're making some probably fair deductions, might lead you to believe that there's some other information that the detectives now have that may point to the circumstances of her disappearance and death. Something that has a bit of a timestamp on it if they're saying back in the spring. Now, right after these stories came out, and not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but we had a bit of a scoop with some of this information. We reported it before other news outlets did. Soon thereafter, there were other stories that came out that said that some other stuff had happened in the Celeste Rivas case. Namely, I don't even want to repeat it because it's wrong. There was a description of the condition of her body, which turned out not to be true. And there was a description of things that had happened around the time of her death, which may or may not be true, that involve the singer David. And I should also point out, he has not, through his representatives, ever really responded to our inquiries about what's going on with the case and whether or not he wants to say anything about these revelations about the investigation, the things that have been confirmed that we know that have happened. Anyway, so outside of that, some other media outlets reported some things about the condition of her body and some things about the case and where the investigation was going, both of which, from our perspective over at Channel 4, were not confirmable and probably wrong. And we didn't report any of this. We were not hearing these things from our contacts that we believe have a very good sense of what's going on with the case. So the stuff is floating around. And again, going back to how I started all this, there's all kinds of speculation because there's so much that isn't known. In so many of the other crime cases that we cover, because there's a lot of public interest or there's something about them that's unusual, there is a lot more information that we know sooner than here, right? Just huge amounts of uncertainty and mystery that are still floating around. So this prompts the LAPD to put out what I can only describe as a really unusual statement refuting some of the information that has gone out publicly about this case. The LAPD is aware of recent stories posted by various media outlets about the Celeste Rivas investigation and would like to dispel some misinformation. It's never good if a government agency is writing this. Doesn't mean they're always right, but they rarely go public to correct bad stuff that's floating around, so that's interesting. The body of Celeste Rivas was not frozen when it was discovered on September 8th, 2025. Just going back to what I would call simple logic, we knew the car was parked in the same spot for weeks, if not more than a month. The idea that remains that were found, and by the way, they were found in a very unique way that I think will come out as the case goes along. And it just doesn't stand to reason that anything that had been frozen, left in a car parked for more than a month, would still be frozen when it was discovered. Let alone the time between the impound and the discovery was days. It was hot. It just doesn't seem like that was possible. One possibility could be that the car was parked longer than the remains were left in the car. But so far, we don't have any indication that somebody was back and forth to it. The car was in a condition that looked like it had been there a while and had been untouched. And I think the investigators have some pretty good information about all of that. So back to their release. She had not been decapitated. Think about how awful this is, that there's stuff floating around that she had been dismembered or decapitated. We have not reported that. If it turns out to be the case, that will surprise me. There were, from the best information we have, somebody did try to do something to her remains, but not what other people have put out there in public. So again, pretty remarkable that the police department is putting out a statement like this. She had not been decapitated. We have evidence that David, the singer with his moniker, traveled to Santa Barbara area during the spring of 2025. The reason for that trip is still under investigation, and we've drawn no conclusions at this point about the relevance of the trip to this case. So that's another thing that's been going around, that perhaps Rivas's death had something to do with that trip to the Santa Barbara area. It could also be completely unrelated. We just don't know. And so, again, it's very unusual for the law enforcement agency involved in a criminal case like this to put out statements like this about how people got things wrong about their reporting on the case. We've been trying to be accurate and timely and put important stuff out as it gets out there and is confirmed and is significant. Again, we try not to bombard everybody with every single detail and every little thing that happens, but we're trying to be really careful about this, always mindful of the fact that we're talking about somebody's child and their untimely death, let alone their death under what could be pretty terrible circumstances. And so we always try to keep that in mind as we're covering. So that's about it on the Celeste Rivas case for now. We'll continue to follow any developments. Our sense over in the newsroom is that we may hear a lot more in the next few weeks than maybe we have in the last couple of months, but nothing verified. We just don't know for sure. All right, let's go back to the Palisades fire, because there have been a number of big developments in the investigation into the criminal side and what may now be fairly connected pieces of the puzzle over on the civil litigation side. This is where thousands of Palisades residents have filed lawsuits, multiple lawsuits that are all kind of being handled under one umbrella against the city of Los Angeles, the state of California. The lawsuits are kind of spaghetti on the wall. They're being thrown in a lot of different directions. But it seems like those cases may have taken a turn and become more focused in the last few weeks, and it could have something to do with the criminal case. So, not to get too confusing here, let's first go to the latest in the criminal case. This is the prosecution of a 29-year-old man named Jonathan Rinderknecht, who was living in Los Angeles and has been charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office, federal prosecutors, for allegedly igniting the Lackman fire, which was the January 1st fire, 6 days before the Palisades fire, that the ATF says it concluded through its investigation into the cause of the much larger, much more destructive and terrible Palisades fire, they believe was caused by embers that were left smoldering from that January 1st fire. If you're watching this, I'm sure you know all that backstory. The significance is the ATF is saying whoever lit that January 1st fire is therefore responsible for the January 7th fire that became the Palisades fire. So let's go to some of our latest reporting, which is that Rinderknecht was back in court asking a judge for a second time to release him on bond.
At 5 with new details about the man accused of starting the fire that became the Palisades fire. His father says federal agents and prosecutors have tried to exaggerate some of the evidence. Good evening once again, everybody. I'm Michael Brownlee.
And I'm Colleen Williams.
I'm just going to pause this here. I'll run the story, but the father of Rinderknecht, named Joel, flew into Los Angeles to testify at a bond hearing. And he was there to try to convince the judge that bond should be granted. But the defense lawyer for Rinderknecht, a guy named Steve Haney, almost used the opportunity to question him under oath to challenge some of the things that federal prosecutors have previously said about the case and Rinderknecht. I'll let this roll for a minute.
He testified this week at a bail hearing and said his entire family is convinced of his son's innocence. Our investigative reporter Eric Leonard was in court.
The defense attorney for Jonathan Rinderknecht says he believes there are major holes in the prosecution's theory of the case, the evidence allegedly linking his client to the Palisades fire. He says his own investigation is now focused on why the first of 2 fires in the Palisades wasn't fully extinguished. Jonathan Rinderknecht, facing trial next year on 3 federal arson charges, appeared to cry at one moment in court as his father, who flew in from France to testify, was asked questions about his relationship with his son. Joel Rinderknecht told the judge, "Everybody in the family is very upset that he's being accused of this." And he said prosecutors have a few things wrong. First, about an AI-generated image that the government said at the news conference announcing the arrest showed Rinderknecht was fantasizing about causing a large fire. The father said the prompt that produced it was about global warming, not arson. Then he says his son never had a foreign passport and didn't have a valid U.S. passport, though the Fed suggested in hearings and court papers those documents were missing, making Rinderknecht a flight risk. After the testimony at federal court in downtown Tuesday, defense lawyer Steve Haney said Rinderknecht's father had planned to stay in the U.S. to help supervise his son if he was released on bond. The judge denied it.
Well, he's obviously disappointed. I mean, you know, it's his son, and he's had a great relationship. You got somebody who's never been charged with a crime, never had a criminal conviction. Despite what the government's rhetoric is, he's never had a mental health diagnosis.
Rinderknecht was arrested in Florida in October and charged with igniting the January 1st Lachman fire in the Pacific Palisades, which the ATF says reignited after it appeared to be extinguished, and that caused the Palisades fire 6 days later. Haney said he's issuing subpoenas for fire department records, detailing why firefighters were allegedly pulled away from that fire soon after it appeared to be out. He said he found witnesses who contradict the Fed's statements that Rinderknecht was alone in the Palisades Highlands at the exact spot the Lachman fire started.
I think there's a very, very, very good argument, and there's direct evidence that a firework started that fire, and there are eyewitnesses who saw and heard a firework that evening. And the government's going to have to get in that courtroom and prove this case.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I got all of Haney's remarks in there, because this is where these two matters kind of intersect, right? You've got the government case against Rinderknecht, who they're accusing of starting the January 1st fire, which later causes the January 7th fire. His defense lawyer is saying that he believes part of the defense is the failure, in his words, of the LA Fire Department to fully extinguish that January 1st fire. Because remember, Rinderknecht is only charged with starting the first fire. He has not been indicted or charged with anything related to the Palisades fire. And so if those two things can be separated in court somehow, that could be a defense strategy. And this is what connects the criminal case to what happened next in the civil case. So the civil case that is going on has to do with thousands of Palisades residents. I'll show you our coverage here. Thousands of Palisades residents who are suing the government over their failure to prevent, is the best way of summarizing this, the failure to prevent the Palisades fire from destroying their homes and causing the deaths of 12 people. Well, pretty critical to that is what Haney, the defense lawyer, just brought up, which is this idea that the fire department left the scene of that first fire without it being fully overhauled or fully extinguished, which is something that the LA Fire Department has denied publicly, that the other agencies that have been accused of having some hand in this alleged negligence have also denied. But let's go to the hearing that happened in civil court a few days after the bond hearing, where the city of Los Angeles, the state of California, are both trying to get the lawsuits dismissed. Without getting too far into the weeds here, there's a very high legal bar to successfully suing a government agency for the failure to do something, which is essentially what these cases are. And in order to get over that bar, you have to meet a variety of legal standards. The procedure to address those legal hurdles has not happened yet. The case is too new. Some of those things were going to be addressed by the judge in January. But because of the revelations that have come out of both the defense of the criminal case and some news reporting about grumblings amongst firefighters who say they were pulled out of the Lackman fire before it was fully overhauled, the lawyers representing the Palisades victims went to court to try to get the judge to allow them an early opportunity prior to the judge making a decision about whether the lawsuit can go ahead at all. They want an early opportunity to begin issuing subpoenas, getting documents and records, and conducting depositions, questioning under oath firefighters and others who may have firsthand knowledge about this very issue. So now all of a sudden, we've got the criminal case over here, the civil case over here, and they are really intertwined at this moment. The defense is making this argument. The lawyers for the Palisades fire victims are saying, we want to investigate this same exact thing. And that's what led to court and what happened the other day with a civil court judge allowing these depositions to go forward. I'll play you a little bit of that.
Annabelle, well, today's ruling may open the door to a lot more information for fire victims who've said in court filings they need to know why more wasn't done to make sure the Lackman fire, that first fire, was completely put out. The judge today ordered the production of documents and records and is allowing the depositions of firefighters and state park officials who were sent to the scene of that Lackman fire.
We got the judge to agree to order that these depositions go forward.
Palisades fire victims attorney Alex Robertson says it's a major win that he says he hopes leads to answers about why the Lackman fire that burned January 1st and appeared to be out the next day wasn't fully extinguished. In court filings this week, Robertson says this photo showing a state parks employee with firefighters at the Lackman fire scene appears to confirm anonymous reports. He says he's heard from firefighters that they were told to leave the burn area before every hotspot had been put out. This video, obtained by his law firm, taken by a Palisades resident on January 2nd or 3rd, appears to show wisps of smoke still coming from the ground in the burn area. The state has now turned over the names of its employees who were there, and Robertson says he'll now be able to ask them questions under oath.
We've heard reports that they showed them maps and there were certain exclusionary areas of sensitive species of plants that the firefighters were told they couldn't go and dig up. And we think that could have very well explained why hot embers were left in place that later rekindled into the Palisades fire.
Okay, so if this is true, because this is an allegation in a lawsuit right now, this would potentially change a lot of people's views of what happened in the Palisades fire. The feds, again, are prosecuting somebody who they allege is an arsonist. The people who are suing the city and the state over what happened out there are saying, regardless of how the fire was ignited, it was the negligence of the government that caused this catastrophic loss. And as of recording this morning, so this is Friday, December 5th, we know that some of those depositions have now been scheduled, involving state parks employees, possibly including the person that you saw in that photo. Also, there's a dozen LA firefighters who are going to be deposed, questioned under oath in the next couple of weeks. And it raises the possibility that even if these lawsuits are ultimately unsuccessful, that the judge finds that there isn't enough legal satisfaction of the thresholds to get a negligence case against the government in front of a jury. Even if these cases don't make it that far, there is a strong possibility that we will learn firsthand from the people who were there a lot more about what happened in that 6-day window between the time the first fire started and appeared to be extinguished and then the time the Palisades fire started. Interestingly, there was no protective order placed over all of this. Sometimes when potentially revelatory records are ordered produced by a judge, they'll put them under, not under seal, but under a protective order, which means the lawyers can have them, but you can't share them outside of that. You can't give them to people like me who are very curious about what these firefighters may have to say. One other thing is that the lawyer that you saw there, Alex Robertson, we've interviewed him a couple of times because he's one of the lead attorneys on the Palisades case. Months ago, his accusations were focused on the LA Department of Water and Power and their failure to keep the water system and the fire hydrants fully charged during the first days of the Palisades fire. We know a lot of fire hydrants went dry. There was that huge reservoir that was empty, and he was aiming to put the liability for a lot of the losses from the fire on the LA Department of Water and Power, and said he had some evidence that power lines in the area were energized during the fire, which the DWP denies, and those lines may have sparked as the fire continued to spread, possibly causing secondary and additional ignitions within the burn area. That stuff is still there, and it's still it's an issue that is going to be litigated, but clearly the attention of the plaintiffs is now shifting to this potential incident that could have caused something other than a full overhaul of the first burn area, the Lackman fire. One of the things he's talking about there in that soundbite that we played, I just want to mention before we go, is this idea that the state Parks Department, California State Parks, had rules in place that may have affected the tactics of firefighters fighting fires in a state park. Part of the area that burned in the Lackman fire has like a dual jurisdiction. Some of the area is within the city of Los Angeles. It's also within the area that's considered part of Topanga State Park, which covers a lot of the mountains there, which is also inside the Santa Monica Mountains, which is another agency that has some jurisdiction. It's not exactly clear who's in charge of what. Somebody knows, and we'll find out. But the California State Parks has a firefighting manual that they say is a non-public document. And in that manual, I've seen it, it says that there are not to be certain firefighting techniques used. You can't use bulldozers. You can't dig up certain plants. The policy is to let the fire burn if it is burning in the wilderness areas. The question now becomes, were those things that are in that manual used as a reason to not do certain things that the fire department would ordinarily do? That's what this whole thing is about here. The State Parks Department did not respond to our questions about the judge's ruling, but previously said in some statements that it's ludicrous, their word, ludicrous to suggest that state parks would stop firefighters from putting out a fire if there was a threat to people's homes and their property in order to preserve or follow its own environmental rules. But again, they haven't answered questions specific to what the judge was talking about here. All of this is going to come out in the next couple of weeks. We're going to stay on top of it, so don't miss our upcoming episodes. I'll see you next time.